Okay, here we go. Here we go. Welcome in to the Denver Sports Podcast, brought to you by Breckenridge Brewery. Breckenridge Brewery is the official beer of DNVR, and regular seltzers are now being sold at the bar. I am your host for today, Jesse Montano. I'm joined by really an all-star lineup here, a who's who of DNVR. I've got Harrison Wynn here from our DNVR Nuggets. Zac Stevens from DNVR Broncos, Patrick Lyons from DNVR Rockies, and my fellow DNVR Avalancher, AJ Haefele. I would say how are you guys doing, but then it'd just be everyone talking over each other. So good to see all you guys. Glad to have you guys here. Thanks for joining me today. So we are officially 4 days into 2022, and thought this would be a good opportunity. You know, the new year fell kind of at the end of the week last week, so we didn't really get a chance to do this before 2021 ended. But I thought this would be a great chance for us to have someone here from every beat representing all the professional sports teams in Denver, and just take a quick look back at what was a crazy year, a blur. You could use a lot of adjectives for 2021. But just kind of wanted to get everyone's unique perspective, how it was, with the different teams, the different sports. So first, before we get into highs and lows and big moments for the teams, I want to ask all of you guys. I want to hear from you guys. What was 2021 like covering your teams? How was it different? How was it better? How was it worse? So Zac, I'll start with you. 2021 covering the Broncos, you've been around football, you've been around Broncos a long time. What was it like?
It was the same, it was the same, especially with the Broncos, because they were the same, gave us a little hope and then just ruined it as the season went on. But in terms of the media side covering it, it was better than 2020. 2020, everything was completely remote. We were only allowed one person in the press box. This year was much better. A lot of in-person stuff. Now toward the end of the season, we're kind of going more to the Zoom route. But it was more back to normal, although still not allowed in the locker room, which is obviously what really tough for us, but more so we're getting back in the right direction.
Yeah, it felt a little bit more normal. It didn't have I guess the NFL was one of the few leagues that wasn't, in terms of scheduling, wasn't really impacted in 2020, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, only 2 games were moved this year. I guess 3 games were moved this year. All happened on one weekend. And of course, this past weekend, everyone wanted the Broncos game to be moved because they were out pretty much 15 guys. But the NFL, they're not going to do the Broncos any favors. They're not going to move them. They are done with moving games now. The NFL, toward the end of the year, they kind of closed their eyes and said, we're going to change our protocols and just run to the finish line here. And we're going to change our protocols so that we can do that.
Yeah. Well, hey, they've got playoffs to worry about. They are definitely in a different situation than a lot of the other leagues who, the NHL, they can push games around. They've got a big chunk that they can make up in February. The NFL is kind of at the end of the line here. They've got to forge ahead and make sure that those games happen.
And that's exactly what they're doing, Jesse.
Yeah. Well, no, it's good to hear that it was a little bit more back to normal for you guys this year. Harrison, on the Nuggets side, what was 2021 like for you guys?
Definitely not normal. It's funny because the NBA fit like a whole season into 2021 pretty much. They started last season in December, late December, like the last week of December, and ended it in in June. So they crammed an entire season into, like just a couple months. And it was a roller coaster. Playing in empty arenas, watching a game as a member of the media, as one of just like 15 people in the entire arena was definitely weird. It's definitely something I'll never forget. It sucked. Like, it was terrible. It was like the least enjoyment I've ever had watching basketball, to be quite honest, watching a game in an empty NBA arena. And the season was just wild too. I mean, the Nuggets played pretty much every other day from January through May. And it was just a roller coaster. And then the Nuggets made like an incredible trade at the trade deadline and looked like they could be a team to win the championship, and Jamal Murray gets hurt and everything snowballs from there. And you go from as high as you could be on the Nuggets to just kind of waiting for the season to end. So it was a wild ride. Definitely my least favorite season, covering a team ever, just because of the empty arenas factor and everything on Zoom. But it was an experience, that's for sure.
So Zach had everything in terms of like on field be pretty much status quo, and for the Nuggets it was really kind of the opposite, where it was a roller coaster up and down craziness. Didn't know what to expect one week to the next.
Yeah, I mean Denver really peaked as a team in March after the trade deadline when they got Aaron Gordon. You're like, wow, they finally pulled off the big trade deadline deal. This team looks like arguably the best team in the NBA for that stretch of games after they got Aaron Gordon. Yeah, and then Jamal Murray gets hurt. And then, you got some great vibes in the first round when somehow the Nuggets beat the Blazers with a Facu Campazzo, Austin Rivers starting backcourt. That backcourt beat Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. So that was great, but then you get smoked by the Suns. So you felt like Denver definitely, left something on the table, but the injuries didn't prevent them from reaching that ultimate ceiling.
Yeah, no, for sure. Injuries has been I think that would be a great word for 2021 for Denver sports, just injuries.
Yeah.
Patrick, you're maybe one who I'm most excited to hear from as we get a little bit further into the show in terms of highs and lows for the Rockies in 2021. But again, just love to hear your experience, being, trying to cover this team from as close as we can. But, definitely having our limitations and being kept kind of at arm's length sometimes. What was it like for you?
Yeah, MLB was the first to come back in 2020, had only the 60-game season. And as Harrison said, it was very strange coming to a ballpark with no fans in it. Everything that goes on in that game has value. There was even one game in September where Charlie Blackmon hit a walk-off grand slam. And you could hear all the players celebrating. And immediately, even before they had stepped off the field, you got this sense that this is totally irrelevant. Like no one cares. Like there's no one outside the stadium celebrating. It's walk-off grand slam. And then, okay, what's the commute maybe like on the way home? Are there any accidents? Do you have any detours? It was so strange. And so in 2021, we were back to somewhat normalcy, still not allowed in the clubhouse, similar to the locker room that Zach's dealing with and the Broncos, but we were able to go down on the field and at least talk with players there. We'll get into some of the highlights of the season, with obviously being able to play in the summertime, whereas NBA, NHL, and the NFL are off. So we got to have a lot more of that sense of normalcy back. It was certainly a lot more than 2020, but we're still waiting to get, all the way back to 100%. I have to say, can't be too greedy. I have to be thankful for how good it was in 2021, all things considered.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you make a great point. The Rockies playing in the summer, which for me, at least, now that we're into 2022, I think summer of 2021 has been the most normal life has felt for me, at least over the last 2 years. So definitely a bit of an advantage there. And then, Rockies and Broncos being outdoors has allowed for a little bit more of like a comfortable environment in terms of bringing fans back. So no, definitely some positives there for what was otherwise a pretty shaky Rockies here. AJ, last one here on this. Obviously, I'm back around the team this year, so I kind of walked straight into all of this. But just from your perspective, man, 2020 into 2021, you come off of the bubble into a shortened season into what we're in now. What has this been like for you relative to what it was like when you and I were covering games together 5-6 years ago?
It was awful.
Yeah.
I mean, it was all like Harrison mentioned, like the going to a game and like did you guys ever what are those movies where they have the 24-hour you can commit any crime that you want?
Purge.
The Purge movies. Yes. Did you guys ever watch those movies?
I watched the first one.
No.
Yeah, like there's by like the second and third one, you find out that like rich people are, I guess spoiler alert, like rich people are are like paying to see these things, like paying to see certain people executed and like gathering to do it. That's how I felt watching hockey in an empty arena. I felt like we were like the exclusive like elites that got to watch this special NHL game just for us. And it was weird and awful and gross and just it felt bad because it was like it was like there's nothing special about like we're just the media, right? Like that we're here to watch the game and then we can do the Zoom access where we have the Zoom access immediately after the game on our own. Like that, right. It was like, why are we even in this building? This is so weird. Yeah. Everything about it was just uncomfortable. The whole season is uncomfortable. The trying to acclimatize to the Zoom only structure that we had, not being around players. You don't even in covering a team. If you're not in the locker room and you're not talking to players, you're not having conversations with people around the organization on a regular basis, you don't have a feel for the organization in the same way.
Yeah.
You just don't. It's hard to pick up the vibe. It's hard to pick up, like, one of the valuable things about having us be eyes and ears for people is that we see things. We can tell people, look, like, we may not be able to necessarily say everything, but we can talk about certain things like, hey, there's certain things that are going on here that you guys should keep in, certain storylines that might be building behind the scenes you might want to keep an eye on. And if we're not in the locker room, if we're not around the team, none of that is there. We don't have any extra information. We don't get to be that lifeline between the fans, and we don't get to tell the human stories. My favorite part of this job is not getting to go to games for free and not getting to travel and see games in different cities, and it's getting to know the players and getting to know them as people and getting the human side of things. And that was completely non-existent last year. There was no human element to it because we're all sitting on Zoom and you ask more or less the same cluster of about 5 to 10 questions that get asked to everybody, every game. And it's almost like playing Mad Libs where you just change the teams involved, the scores involved, the days involved, the injury that's involved, the player that's involved. And you just fill in the blanks as you go. It didn't feel good. It felt very impersonal. It felt very distant. It felt very cold. It was everything that you don't love about sports. There was no fan passion. There was no reaction to a huge moment. Like the Minnesota Wild rolled into the Pepsi Center last year, I guess the Ball Arena last year, and they were riding high on this huge winning streak, and they were the big surprise. And the Avs put them down as like the biggest rival that the Avs have these days. They, in back-to-back games, blew them out, embarrassed them, absolutely housed them. And all I could think was, imagine this place with fans right now. Right. Imagine them putting up back-to-back blowouts against the Wild. And instead, I'm sitting here with 5 other media people just kind of like, hey, they scored again. Cool. And like you hear the players and stuff occasionally because so much crowd noise got piped into Ball Arena that I the first game of the season, the crowd noise was so bad being piped in. I had a panic attack in the arena.
Well, visiting teams complained about it, right? At Ball Arena specifically. That they were like,
they actually had to adjust it because it was completely over the top. So you're awful, man. It was awful. This year it got off to a little bit better of a start, and then with the COVID shutdowns, we're back. It's back to awful. This sucks.
Yeah, and you make a great point about the eyes and ears in the locker room. The one that comes to my mind was a couple of years ago. Nathan Mackinnon went out with injury, and then he came back. He was playing, but if you were going into the locker room, you would notice that he wouldn't take off any of his gear until after the media left. He was normally one of the first people to get, down to his kind of warm-ups, and then he'd, go hit the showers. He would stay in full gear until the media left, and that went on for about 4 or 5 weeks. And I remember, you caught on to that, and you mentioned it to me, and it was something that I was keeping my eye on. And again, just something that you don't get to see now. And Zach, real quick before we move on, I just want to ask you, because I have heard that a lot about the NFL in that being in that locker room you typically get a little bit more time in there than maybe some of the other sports, and you really get a chance to get to know people. How has that impacted you this year and just your ability to kind of like what AJ was saying, get close to the team, get close to the players, losing that locker room access?
Yeah, I mean, big time. We're typically in there for 45 minutes, 5 days a week.
Whoa.
We're in there after practices every day, and then we're also in there after the game. And all of you guys know that that's where the relationships come. That's where exactly the behind the scenes things that you see, the things that you hear happen. And we've lost that completely, not just for this year, but for 2020 as well. We obviously didn't have that when everything was Zoom for us. So now that's 2 straight seasons. So now that's 2 straight draft classes, 2 straight free agencies. It's like we know this team nearly as well as the fans do. It's just everything that comes out on Zoom, which we're on, and you can get some things from there, but not nearly as close. So it's going to be great if we're allowed in the locker room this year. It's going to be like I'm covering a whole new team in terms of getting to know these guys, but there's no guarantee that we're going to be in the locker room this coming year either, because the NFL and NFL players don't necessarily like the media, if you can believe that. And so they'll use every single excuse, some may say reason, they say, in order to keep us they have for 2 years.
Yeah, that is the one thing that I have thought about, where it's like, I don't know if the players are going to want to go back to the way that it used to be, because I have a feeling that they enjoy this, because now the PR teams are the one who decides who has to talk to media, and it's a couple minutes and then cool, wrap it up. You don't get to stand there at their stall anymore and kind of poke whoever you want to poke.
And Jesse, I talked about how the COVID protocols have changed for the NFL in just the past couple of weeks, which really is a way to the NFL to make it to the end of the season. They've really done some interesting things, and one of those interesting things is the media tests more for COVID than the players do, which is just, it's mind-boggling. In order to protect the players, they don't have to test anymore, but the media, which is now only seeing the players over Zoom, has to test. Right. It's crazy.
Whoa, that's crazy. I did not know that part of the new protocols. That's nuts. Yeah, like you said.
It really is, and it's just that's how they're going to treat the media.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not going to hold my breath on them letting us back in the locker room anytime soon, eh? Cool. Well, so no, it's great to hear the different perspectives, all the different leagues, and how kind of everyone was impacted. Want to get into some of the highs and lows, but first, do have to remind you guys, this is the Denver Sports Podcast, brought to you by Breckenridge Brewery. We're also brought to you by our great friends over at DraftKings. We have hit the final week of the pro football regular season, and college football is heading into the national championship. DraftKings Sportsbook has an unbelievable offer to get all fans in on the action for this exciting time on the football calendar. New customers can bet just $5 on any football game, any football team to win their game, and if they do, you win $200 in free bets. So let's wind down the season with a big win. DraftKings Sportsbook customers can also bet on football with same-game parlays. Combine multiple bets for the same game for a bigger payout. The more legs you add, the more money you can win. DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable. And best of all, you can deposit, withdraw your cash whenever you want. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code DNVR. Bet just $5 on any football team, that's college or pro, to win and win $200 in free bets if they are victorious. That's promo code DNVR this week at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older. Colorado only. New customers only. Restrictions apply, and see DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. And of course, if you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700. So I have always been taught, when you are talking to someone, when you're reflecting on something, you always end on the good. So let's start with, what was the low point for everyone's team, that everyone's respective team that they cover? Harrison, let's start with you. It was a really up and down year for the Nuggets. Lots of peaks, lots of valleys. What would you say in calendar year 2021? What was the low point for the Denver Nuggets last year?
Yeah, I would have said getting swept by the Suns, but that was something that you could just kind of see coming. And when it finally happened, there wasn't like that much shock and awe to it. You were kind of bracing yourself for that to come. So I'd probably say Jamal Murray tearing his ACL. I mean, that was really figuratively the end of the Nuggets season. And that happened on April 12th in Golden State at that terrible new elitist arena in San Francisco. That cursed Chase Center. Yeah, but that was, like I said, that was the end of the Nuggets season, because just a couple weeks before that, they had traded for Aaron Gordon. They looked like legitimately the best team in the NBA with everybody healthy. And then just kind of at the end of a loss in Golden State. And it was wild how it happened, because it happened in the end of a fourth quarter where Denver clearly wasn't winning a game. And, you know, that game was already decided, and Jamal Murray comes down the lane and just tears his ACL in his knee. And the Nuggets' hopes or whatever dreams they had last season were gone like that. They were ended, because as good as Nikola Jokic was last season, and he was the MVP, he was the best player in the league, he could not carry whatever was left of the Denver Nuggets past, you know, the Phoenix Suns, who went on to make the finals. So Jamal Murray going down in Golden State, that was definitely the low point of the season, because it ended the Nuggets season.
How much of that do you think? I mean, does it kind of feel like it's almost even carried over into this year? Just that was almost kind of like the official start of the Nuggets injury problems that have now kind of just haven't gone away.
Yeah, I mean, the Nuggets have always had a lot of injuries. It's just something that's kind of followed this team throughout the Jokic era. There's always been, you know, a key guy that it seems like he's going down in a pretty important moment. But it's for sure carried over to this season, because Denver has no room for error. And because Jamal Murray's been out, and Michael Porter Jr. has been out, that's a whole nother thing. But now every single night, it's just squarely on Nikola Jokic's shoulders. You know, if Nikola Jokic doesn't have an 8-level game, Nuggets aren't winning, and they're probably not even scoring 100 points. So, like, everything is just on Jokic right now, and it's rough. Like, you can see it wear on him this season. So yeah, it's definitely carried over this year.
AJ, injuries is definitely something that we're familiar with on the Avalanche side, but I want to ask you, because I have a feeling I know the answer. Low point 2021 for the Avs.
Game 5 against Vegas.
Yeah.
I think it was 2-2. Things had gone really poorly in Vegas. They had blown the 2-0 series lead, and then they played an awesome Game 5 on home ice. They had a 2-0 lead going into the third period. It looked like, hey, if they're just going to swap home games, the Avs are golden. We'll see the Avs in the conference finals. They might survive this thing. Like they contrary to the narrative that exists out there that Vegas just came in and blew out the Avs 4 straight games, and that was how it went. The Avs played an awesome Game 5. They dominated Vegas. And the difference was that Marc-Andre Fleury played out of his mind and refused to give up that third goal. Vegas scored twice in about 2 minutes, a few minutes into the third period. And then the Avs couldn't get it done in overtime. And Ryan Graves fires 2 pucks into Mark Stone, and break away the other way. And Grubauer doesn't make the save. And they were down 3-2 going into Vegas. Philip Grubauer's confidence had fallen apart, and as we've seen in Seattle so far, is nowhere to be found. Might have a lot of story to be written, but that game might have altered his career for the rest for forever. And it's Game 5 was just that was the one that ripped out the heart of the Avalanche for real.
It felt like that was going to be tough to come back from too after dropping that type of game. You kind of just got the sense that series was done. Yeah, no, I agree. Zach, I'm really curious to hear from you on this, because it was an interesting season. It seemed like there was maybe some reasons for optimism. New GM. You had a quarterback who, he was a known quantity, but you said, okay, well, maybe with the roster that we've built around him, if, the safe play can maybe get us there. But kind of like you said it off the top, it really just kind of ended up being more the same. What would you say was kind of like the bottoming out point in 2021 for the Broncos?
Yeah, there were a lot of highs, a lot of lows this season, and of course it starts with the human element. The obviously the biggest low was losing Demaryius Thomas. Just we saw how much he meant to not just the organization but the city and the fans. So you have to start there, but then bringing it to the football field, it was when the season really appeared over. And that was week 7, Thursday night football against the Cleveland Browns. Jesse, you said it. Broncos started hot, 3-0. They had excitement. Yep. And then they faced a tough stretch where you could kind of convince yourselves, okay, the Broncos lost 3, 1 to Baltimore, 1 to Pittsburgh, 1 to Vegas. Those teams, you could convince yourself they were good. And at the time, most of those teams were playing good ball. But then they go into Cleveland on Thursday night, their only primetime game up to that point, and it appeared that was going to be their only primetime game until a game got flexed later. And this was the opportunity for the Broncos to get back on the right foot, to get back to a winning record, to be 4-3 instead of dropping a 4th straight and really seeing their season go downhill. And on top of that, they were handed so many gifts. Baker Mayfield was going to be out. So the Broncos got a revenge game against Case Keenum. They were down not just Nick Chubb. They were down Kareem Hunt. They were on their 3rd string running back. They were down multiple starting offensive linemen. So the Broncos, this great defense, what it was supposed to be, was going up against a backup offensive line, a 3rd string running back who had never started a game in the NFL before named Dearness Johnson. No one had heard of him. And Case Keenum. And they went out and lost, and it was a very disappointing game, 17-14. It was embarrassing. On top of that, you had Dearness Johnson go for 150 yards on the ground, just tear up the Broncos defense. The offense wasn't able to do anything. You have Teddy Bridgewater who goes out there. He's at like 50%. He's limping throughout the whole week. He goes out there instead of Drew Lock, so some questionable decisions there. Teddy doesn't look that good. And then Von Miller also plays his last snap as a Denver Bronco. He got hurt right before halftime, and then he would not play another snap for the Broncos. I mean, just talk about as embarrassing as a game can be. The Broncos did it against the Browns that day. But there was also another low moment before the season started. It was right before the draft. It was a 24-hour window right before the draft, where the day before the draft, the Broncos trade for Teddy Bridgewater. And initially, people are thinking, you've got to be kidding. We're doing this again. We're doing the veteran, pretty much a backup quarterback route. We're doing this. But then it sparked some hope of people saying, you know what? This could be a move to set up Justin Fields for the Broncos bringing in Trey Lance in the draft. So it got some hope. And then the draft comes around, and hours before the draft, another high comes out where the Broncos are close, very close to trading for Aaron Rodgers. So everyone is just so excited now. And then the draft comes around. They don't get Aaron Rodgers. They don't get Justin Fields. They don't get Mac Jones. They get a damn good player in Pat Surtain, but it wasn't the quarterback route. And that's when the reality sunk in that it's Teddy Bridgewater. We're doing this again. We're doing the Case Keenum again. We're doing the Joe Flacco again. We're going down this route. And as all Broncos fans know, that is not the route they wanted to go down. So I think that was a low point. And especially that was a time when the Broncos did just get a really good player in Pat Surtain. They did get a really good draft class. But at the end of the day, quarterback is the only thing that matters. And we've learned that in Denver the hard way over the past 5 years. So you kind of take a step back and you're like, well, this sucks again. Going into training camp with a quarterback battle with one guy that just led the league in interceptions and another guy who, in Teddy Bridgewater, who we pretty much know what he is. He's a journeyman guy. So that was the point too.
Journeyman backup. Bronco fans were sitting there saying, I've seen this movie before and I hate the ending. But no, AJ and I were actually just talking about that the other day after our show. We were just kind of, and he made the point, he goes, none of the conversations are worth having until they figure out what they're doing at quarterback. So like you said, Patrick Surtain's a great player. I don't think anybody's upset that he's in Denver. But it does just kind of have that feel of, that's all of that's, good and well, Jerry Jeudy, Patrick Surtain, and pick a name that you want to pick. It's all kind of moot until you get figured out what's going on at quarterback.
Well, and on top of that, Teddy Bridgewater just had the best year of his career. 18 touchdowns was more than the 15 touchdowns that was his career high entering this season. The 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, the 90 plus passer rating. Those were all the best that we've seen in Denver since Peyton Manning in 2014. Yet it is so far from the 35 touchdowns that Justin Herbert just threw for, and obviously what Patrick Mahomes can do. So the Broncos bar was so low, and Teddy Bridgewater exceeded that, yet it's just so far away from what they need. And Broncos, I mean, that's a storyline going into 2022, and I hope that at 1 year from now when we're talking about this, we're talking about how the Broncos finally got it turned around, or else we're probably going to be talking about another losing season.
Yeah, no, and I like what I like you bringing up week 7, because now, in retrospect, I think you're 100% right. That's when it really did feel like, oh man, this might just be the same thing again.
Yeah.
Patrick, the Rockies definitely have had a really interesting last couple of seasons. Some big trades that haven't necessarily yielded the return that many thought they would. It was a rough season this last year, and it seems like, man, they have just, from where they were 2-3 seasons ago, where it really seemed like this team was on the up. They finally had their superstar, and they had something to build around. Just really seemed like it's gone the other way since 2021. Where would you say really everything kind of came together in the worst way?
It definitely came together on January 29th when we got word that the Rockies were indeed going to trade Nolan Arenado to the St. Louis Cardinals. It didn't get finalized until after the weekend on February 1st. But nevertheless, that was something that there had been those minor rumblings. I mean, look, when you're in a smaller market like we are in baseball, as far as the Rockies are concerned, every team is looking at the Rockies roster saying, okay, who do we want to pluck from them? Like who can we just take? And it's not that simple. The Rockies don't really operate in that way. So even with the big contract the Rockies gave Nolan Arenado, this idea that other teams were going to just take him from the Rockies was exactly that. It was just an idea. It wasn't really going to happen. So speculate all you want. The same thing is going on with Germán Marquez right now. But when it finally came down that was going on, I think that was the straw that broke the back for a lot of fans, because there had been, certainly not transparency, but there was this idea that if you can take ownership in the front office at their word, that this is what's going on, okay, that's fine. Maybe you could squint and believe it. But once that trade happened and you're getting rid of a once-in-a-generation player, a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer, you can't then turn around and say, but we are here to contend and we are here to play for a postseason. You can't do both of those things simultaneously in trading away your best player. You understand the financial ramifications of that, but you can still have your best player and financially figure out a way to make things work in light of the pandemic and the lost revenue, with there not being any fans in the ballpark in 2020. So not only did you lose your favorite player, and again, that first ballot Hall of Famer, you lost any hope and appreciation or trust in the not only front office, but really the ownership of the Colorado Rockies.
And so that's actually something I want to ask you real quick about. Was the low point the trade itself, or was it maybe that press conference a day or two later where ownership straight up said, look, we're not going to compete with the big markets. We're going to, do the best we can. But this is kind of what it is. Because that to me really seemed like, and obviously I'm paraphrasing that wasn't exactly what they said. But the press conference that followed it up almost seemed just as bad as the trade itself.
That's a great question. I really think, and again, maybe this is just, again, that media perspective that we have, where, as AJ said, we know some things going on behind the scenes that we can't always articulate or go into detail as well. We just kind of can see where things are going. So the trade was the shock for me, but I could see how, then seeing the Jeff Bridich, the GM at the time, and the owner Dick Monfort actually having to address it, and then you visibly see all the things going on behind the scenes, those rumblings that we kind of already knew about, actually seeing that hammers home the point of, oh, wait, a lot of this has just been lip service. And they've been saying this one thing, but now they're finally admitting something other than that. Now I know it's truly legit, that they can't have their cake and eat it too, and that there's a trouble here. There's a problem going on with the powers that be. So that press conference definitely illuminated a lot of things, a lot of statements, because that's one thing in the previous administration with Jeff Bridich is he didn't really offer himself up to the media that much. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity to, hear it from the horse's mouth, as it were. And so that press conference really illuminated a lot of those things that, we maybe in the media knew, but now they couldn't hide around it anymore. And they had to just come out and say, here's the deal. Here's why we did it. We're going to try to look like the good guys, but there's really no way you can do that in trading this once in a generation player.
And paying $50 million to the team to do it.
Yes, we are so cash strapped that we need to give you $50 million in order to save money. Yeah, that's rough.
Oh man.
Yeah, there were so many details of that trade where I was like, I'm sure these make sense, like if you actually look at them, but I can't like match any of these lines up right now. I honestly think, to Zach's point, when you're talking about the human element of it, I think, Demaryius Thomas was definitely the low point for Denver as a city, in terms of the sports scene, just seeing the real impact. Honestly, the day he passed away, I had an Uber driver. He asked me what I did, and I told him, and he brought up Demaryius Thomas, and literally this random Uber driver that I had a Demaryius Thomas story about how him and his daughter were sitting at Cherry Creek Mall, and DT came over, and she was wearing a Demaryius Thomas jersey. He came over and offered to sign the jersey, then went up to Lids and bought her a hat. Him and Emmanuel Sanders signed it. They were both there together. Literally, he approached them. Just one of those things where you could tell he was truly such a genuinely good guy. And so I think that was kind of a bottoming out point for a lot of Denver sports this year. But maybe in terms of on field, on ice, on court, the Nolan Arenado trade may be the low point for Denver sports this year, just because Von Miller was traded kind of at the end of the career. Hey, go get one last crack at a Super Bowl. Nolan Arenado is someone who was in his prime, was a true still superstar in the league. And anytime someone like that leaves your market, not good.
and even going into that too, there was a battle essentially brewing between Nolan Arenado and the general manager. And you had the owner siding essentially with the general manager. Now, again, that's one narrative that you could look at it when really it was just, look, the bottom line is the financials. So I'm just going to go what's best in that situation. But you were siding with the general manager that had clearly made some errors and was on his way out in the first place. And you dealt away that generational talent.
Yeah, you let a guy make that huge trade who then turns around and quit on you, 2 months later?
Yeah.
That was the crazy part.
And you knew he was probably going to quit too. That's the worst part about it.
Well, and if he didn't, then you were going to be forced to fire him. And all of the roads led to this person will not stay. And you let him make that decision.
It's a head scratcher.
Well, hey, like I said, I've always learned to end on a positive note. So I want to get into the positives and the high points for everybody. But first, of course, this is the Denver Sports Podcast, brought to you by Breckenridge Brewery. Also want to remind you guys about our great friends over at Mint Mobile. This holiday season, the holidays are kind of behind us, but the best deal in wireless can be found at Mint Mobile. Right now, switch to Mint Mobile and buy any 3-month plan. You'll get another 3 months for free. They're the first company to sell premium wireless service online only. Mint Mobile lets you order from home and save a ton with phone plans starting at just $15 a month. Guys, I mentioned it the last time I was hosting the Denver Sports Podcast. I have worked in the mobile industry before, and I can tell you right now, for sure, Mint Mobile is ruffling some feathers with some of the big traditional carriers. They just can't compete. Again, that is, if you sign up right now, by any 3-month plan, you'll get another 3 months free over at Mint Mobile. Also want to remind you guys about our great friends over at Sexy Pizza. We have Sexy Pizza at every Broncos tailgate, which I believe we actually just had our last one last weekend, 2 weekends ago. So look
We
forward
got
to
one
those
more coming up.
One more coming up. I'm sorry. Thank you, Zach.
Saturday special.
It's a Broncos tailgate on Saturday, and there's sexy pizza. I can't think of anything better. They are Denver based. They used to be one of my go-tos. Just walk right up to the pizza window right downtown. You can get a slice. You can get a whole pie. Anything you want. And guys, it's delicious. Stop by any of their 4 Denver locations: Capitol Hill, Old South Pearl, Jefferson Park, and Park Hill, with a new location in Trinidad coming soon. Jesse Montano with Zach, Harrison, AJ, and Patrick, rounding out 2021. Want to end all this on a positive note, on a high note. So AJ, I'm going to start with you. Really, for the Avs, it was a year of a lot of ups with really kind of one big giant glaring down. But where would you say for the Avs that there wasn't really a better time to be an Avs fan than what in 2021?
I think after they swept St. Louis.
Yeah.
In the first round. And maybe you could even maybe say after the 7-1 win in game 1 against Vegas, where it looked like they were unstoppable.
Yeah.
I remember after that game 1, I tried telling people game 1's are where all the weird stuff happens. Don't make too much of it. But it was also impossible not to just be feeling amazing. They just swept St. Louis, who has been a team that had given Colorado some issues in previous years. And then their big rival, the team that they tied with atop the NHL in the standings for the President's Trophy, they beat 7-1 in game 1. Like, they just dominated them. And it just felt like, oh my God, this is it. This is it. This is it. This is finally the team. They're so good. They've won their first 5 playoff games. Life is great.
Yeah.
And that felt like the end of the ride.
Yeah, it's funny because, like I said, there was really kind of one big glaring negative on the year, and it came immediately following. Because I agree with you, that was probably the best you were feeling all year. The injuries weren't really a problem, and yeah, you were 5-0 in the playoffs in the second round, and then it was right after that things kind of came unraveled.
Yeah, because after game 2, like you're like, they're lucky to be up 2-0. Yeah. Like they got outplayed for a lot of game 2, and without kind of a soft slashing call at the start of overtime, they maybe don't win that game. They probably don't win that game. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think you're right. It was the peak followed by an immediate valley. Patrick, obvious what kind of was the bottoming out for the Rockies, but that didn't mean that they didn't have good moments throughout the year. What would you say, in your opinion, was where the Rockies and their fans were maybe feeling the best?
For a season in which they didn't make the postseason, I'd probably have to say this was one of the most joyous seasons Rockies fans could possibly have. And again, that being said, with the trade of Nolan Arenado, they saw their first member of the franchise enshrined in the Hall of Fame with Larry Walker. Also saw his number get retired, only the second Rockies player to ever have that happen. Fans got to be back in the ballpark, so that obviously was a nice bump to have there on opening day for the first time since late in September of 2019. But possibly the biggest thing that happened in Denver in the last year was the 2021 All-Star Game, which have to do with all of the All-Star Game festivities, and including the Home Run Derby, another great success that event was, and the game itself. So, even with the trade of Arenado and this idea that, man, we've lost a lot of hope. Hey, if it happens, it happens. You root for the players. We've lost a lot of hope. That being said, there was a lot of reasons to be happy if you were a baseball and a Rockies fan living in Colorado this season.
That shows just how much the last 2 years have just completely run together for me. Because I was living downtown when the All-Star Game was in town. It was awesome, like having all the festivities around. We tried really hard to make it to the Home Run Derby, but the tickets were just too outrageous. But no, that you're 100% right. That was an awesome weekend for the city, for the ballpark. Coors Field got to kind of show off a little bit. you're right. Like I said, these last 2 years have run together. I completely forgot that was the 2021 All-Star game.
And for, baseball fans who, those that are a little bit more ambitious, they might go to the winter meetings every year and hang out in a hotel lobby to see their favorite journalists and some of the stars that make the all MLB team, things of that nature. There's always stuff going on in the off season for events like that. We haven't had that in the last 2 years. And so for the entirety of the baseball world to descend upon Colorado in Denver and be around for all these different events. And for fans who even couldn't afford to go to the Home Run Derby or to get a ticket, you're still able to go to Fan Fest and get a feeling of what the history of the game is like, with exhibits about, the Hall of Fame and Cooperstown. There are events for kids. There's all kind of giveaways. You could wait in line and get autographs from legendary Rockies players and Hall of Famers alike. So it really was a celebration. It felt like Denver was the best party that, the country has had probably, in the last 2 years, truly.
Yeah, no, everything they had going on around McGregor Square, I thought was awesome. All open air stuff. They had a little mini Hall of Fame set up, and I thought they did a phenomenal job. So I agree. Zach. So again, repeating what I said last year, there was definitely moments for optimism. There was definitely moments to feel bad. They improved on their win total for the first time in, I guess, 3 seasons now. When were the Broncos and their fans feeling the best?
I have to give 2 ones here. And the first one, for some people, they were thrilled 1 year ago from today at the beginning of the new year when John Elway took one of the most interesting promotions by promoting himself in order to relinquish general manager duties to someone else. And boy, I mean, guys, we all need to get fired that way. By getting promoted, you get to keep your $1 million salary for another year. You get to pop your head in when you want. You get to go to the games, fly private to the games if you want, and then not really have any day-to-day responsibilities. And that was a high for so many people because of what the last 5 years since Super Bowl 50 had been like for the Broncos. And especially at that quarterback position, the Broncos just never found one. John Elway said one time at the combine, I'm going to keep swinging and missing, which is interesting. He said missing because he was right on that. I'm going to keep swinging and missing at the quarterback position. But the truth is, John never swung at the quarterback position. Right. And the big swing after Peyton Manning. And when you pick a quarterback in the mid-20s, that's not really a true commitment at a quarterback. And then what did he do after? Case Keenum, he paid $18 million a season. That seems like a lot. It was still the bottom third of starting quarterbacks. That wasn't a swing. Trading a 4th-round pick for Joe Flacco, that's not doing anything. And we just continued to see that. And so a lot of people were happy that John was moving on up by giving control to someone else. So that was a big high for a lot of people. And then, of course, George Payton, when they brought him in, he was a big hire, really well regarded around the league. And we're still getting a true evaluation of him. So far, pretty much every non-quarterback move he's made has been fantastic. But again, it comes back to quarterback. And so far, we have not seen a great move by George Payton. So that's still wait and see. But I had to start off with, at the beginning of the year, brought so much hope to fans. And then on the field, a couple weeks after it seemed like the season ended with their low point against the Browns, the Broncos come out and they get back above 500 somehow, some way, going into Dallas to play the 6-1 Dallas Cowboys. Cowboys on a 6-game winning streak. They have the best offense in the NFL, scoring over 30 points per game, and the Broncos absolutely dominated them. Broncos didn't allow the Cowboys to score until garbage time. They were up 30-0, absolutely dominating what looked like the best team in the NFL. And again, not only it gave hope in that game, but then they were 5-4. They were right back in it. And then we kind of changed our view of this team. Of instead of just beating bad teams and losing to good teams, we thought, wow, this team can compete with some good teams. Now, are they going to sweep the Chiefs? Of course, they're not going to sweep the Chiefs, but they could do well against the Chargers and the Raiders the rest of the season. And they held Ezekiel Elliott to a terrible game. Dak Prescott, they made him look absolutely human. And Javonte Williams had his first 100-yard game, and man, he's been one of the highlights of this Broncos team this season. The wrecking ball, the guy that just takes multiple guys to bring him down, and he was really special that day. And Teddy Bridgewater looked like the Teddy Bridgewater that the Broncos had hoped for. Extremely efficient, putting up 249 yards in that game. So it was really the perfect game against a great team, and it got a lot of people believing in the Broncos again. They would ruin that belief 1 week later against the Eagles, though, going up with the highs and lows of this season. But that was certainly the high point on the field.
So in terms of on the field, would you say that game against Dallas was maybe the high point of the last few seasons for the Broncos? Because, I mean, that was – maybe the most complete game they've played. I don't know. Maybe you tell me. When was the last time they played a game that complete on both sides of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, that was absolutely it. And one more thing that game did was it brought hope to Vic Fangio. Now, it didn't get buy-in from everyone about Vic Fangio, but it gave some people hope because that was a different Vic than I've seen in any other game. He was fired up on the sidelines. He was fired up with his players on the side, and the team came out really fired up, and everyone thought, okay, if this is going to be the head coach moving forward, maybe there is something here for the future, because we obviously know what his defense can do. We just saw it that day by dominating the Dallas Cowboys, and potential head coach for the Broncos, Kellen Moore, he shut him down. And then you got hope there. And that is something the Broncos have just been missing for so long. And that day provided it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was, it was a fun game to watch. And that's not something that the Broncos haven't had a ton of like really fun games where you just feel good from start to finish. And that was definitely one of them. It did. It got you thinking, well, hey, can this be the kind of launching pad for the rest of the season? Obviously didn't go that way, but I think that game is a great call out in terms of that's probably the best Bronco fans have felt about an individual game in a few years at least. Harrison definitely won one huge high for the Nuggets, and it was something that I think not only the team needed, the franchise needed, but the city needed. In your opinion, what was the highest high for the Nuggets in 2021?
Yeah, it was definitely Nikola Jokic winning the MVP. First Nugget in franchise history, first Nuggets player ever to win MVP, the first center to win MVP since Shaq in 2000, the first second-round pick to ever win MVP. It's crazy.
That's crazy.
It's really, really like one of the most incredible sports stories that I've seen in my lifetime for sure. A second-round pick out of Serbia comes in. Nobody knows who this guy is in 2015, 2016. He comes off the bench. He just keeps improving and keeps improving. And all of a sudden, he's the face of a franchise. And he's a top 10 player and then a top 5 player and then the best player in the NBA, which I think he's been for the last 2 years. So it's a hell of a story. And it kind of culminated with him winning MVP after one of the greatest offensive seasons in NBA history. And it's funny. He wins MVP. He gets presented the award prior to Game 3 against the Suns. He's got his brothers there. He's got the whole team behind him. Fans were back in the arenas during the playoffs, so he got to accept it in front of the home crowd. And then he goes out and goes for 32 points, 20 rebounds, 10 assists, becomes only the third player in NBA history to go for 30, 20, and 10 in the playoffs. And then post-game says he was mad at himself because he thought he could have played better. So it was just like the classic Jokic moment on that night to put a bow on, like I said, one of the greatest offensive seasons in NBA history, and somehow he's even better this year. But that was definitely the top moment from last year.
How big was that in terms of it being a Denver Nugget? Because I think, and maybe this is just me kind of watching from afar, further than you certainly, where it seems like the NBA favors the bigger markets more than maybe any other pro league. I even remember, and I can't remember the guy's name from ESPN, who posted that video in his car where he straight up said, we don't talk about Jokic because that doesn't bring the ratings. So why would I talk about him if it doesn't bring the ratings? well, it kind of forced everyone to talk about him when he won MVP. How big was that for the Denver Nuggets to franchise?
Yeah, I think it was massive. I mean, you're absolutely right. The NBA, I think more than any other sport, really highlights its major markets. I mean, last season, the year before, people were legitimately, like very legitimate media personalities and writers were talking about Kyle Kuzma as a star. And he was only a star because he played on the Lakers in Los Angeles. And he's having arguably the best season of his career in DC with the Wizards this year, but you don't hear a peep about him because he's not on the Lakers. So yeah, I agree. The NBA more than any other sport does that. So it was massive for the Nuggets. And, you know, it did take every other contender for MVP last season going down with an injury at some point. And Jokic, of course, played in every single game last year. And that was a reason why he won it. If, you know, Joel Embiid didn't get injured, would Nikola Jokic have won MVP? I don't know. Maybe not. But he survived the war of attrition. And he was also just the most dominant, best player in the NBA last season. And yeah, now he has that for the rest of his career.
I was saying, it really got to one of those things where anybody that was actually watching knew that Jokic was the MVP, but it got to the point where it was like, it's not possible for you to pick anyone else. Like, there's no one else even in the conversation. Availability is a skill, and he outlasted everyone.
Yeah. It's not impossible, though, because I got to remind you, Jesse, Steph Curry got one first place MVP vote last year, and his team didn't even make the playoffs.
Yeah.
He got one.
Yeah, it's always tough being here in Denver. You know, Nathan McKinnon's been up for 2 Hart trophies, and I think he absolutely should have won at least one of them. You know, there's different theories that, you know, being in the Mountain Time Zone, some of the East Coast guys don't even stay up and watch, you know, Western Time Zone games and stuff like that. But no, it does always seem to be frustrating. Some of these guys just seem to get passed over. Any of you gentlemen have anything else to add, you know, about the teams you cover or just kind of anything in general in terms of 2021? Think we're good?
It was
Cool.
just great. It was great seeing fans. I said it already, but just having fans back in the ballpark and the stadium and arena, like that's just so huge that we kind of take that for granted a little bit because it's just always there and it should be. I mean, why wouldn't the fans be there? Even if it's just a small crowd, right? Even when people leave early, that's part of the story, right? And yet they weren't there for that. They weren't a part of the story in any capacity. And at least for baseball, there are some stadiums where you find your spots where you could still watch part of the game, right? And that's not really true for basketball and hockey. Although, Jesse, I know I did see when you were up in Seattle, there's a way where you can kind of look down into that stadium. And so I think there might be those little things, but ultimately at the end of the day, there were no fans whatsoever. We couldn't operate as DNVR if it wasn't for fans, if it wasn't for our members. And so that's the biggest thing I think we have to give thanks for. Maybe just the best overall highlight amongst the 4 beats amongst all sports is having the fans back.
For sure. Zach, last question that we're going to jump out of here. Did the NFL ever lose fans, or were fans in the building the whole time?
Not last year. In 2020, obviously, fans were not there for most of the time, which was just crazy. But last year, fans have been here. Outside of the Broncos, they've had quite a few no-shows, but that has not been due to COVID protocols.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. No, I agree, Patrick. It's great having people back. It is just part of like the fabric of what, you know, makes sports. And part of the reason why we love sports is that emotion and passion. And it's great to have that back. Seriously, thank you guys all so much for taking the time out. I know this is kind of an extra thing that you guys all add to your schedule. So I really appreciate you guys jumping on. For Zach, Harrison, Patrick, and AJ, I am Jesse Montano. We will talk to you guys next time on the Denver Sports Podcast.